Hey guys, David Pingree out here today on our 2019 Honda CRF450R and doing our dialed in on this bike. We've already done our intro, put some time on it that day. We've got a whole nother day on it today. And the good news on this bike, it doesn't take a whole lot to make this thing awesome. Literally, I don't even think you need to go out and revalve this thing to race it. It works that well in stock trim, but there are a few things to get it working right that you need to remember. We had to give this back between our intro and this segment that we did today, this riding session, and someone between that time had ridden it. So this is something I would tell you, anybody that buys a new bike, don't assume that the dealer has set it up the way it's supposed to be set up. You know, 10 or 12 clicks out on all your clickers and all that, because that doesn't always happen. So my recommendation is always, when you're gonna go out and ride your bike for the first time, go all the way in with your compression and rebound clickers and count them all the way out to 12. Make sure they're both symmetrical and they're in the right place. Another thing we noticed today, I went out and started riding. I'm like, man, it feels really twitchy and nervous in the front. What the heck's going on? And I noticed the forks had been slid up in the clamps. And obviously, anytime you slide the forks up, you're weighting the front end more, and it just makes the front end really nervous. That's a great fix for a bike that doesn't like to turn well. The Honda is not one of those motorcycles. So sliding the forks up, man, unless you're racing arena cross or, I don't know, you've got some type of weird little tight trail system you ride in, you want to have these forks even with the first hash line. If you're really high-speed off-road stuff, maybe even flush with the cap. So we're at that first line, right below the cap. And just by making that change, it's probably a 3 mil change. Huge difference on the track, night and day in terms of stability. With the forks slid up, I felt like I was just riding over the front wheel. The thing wanted to just tuck and knife, and it was a mess. So that immediately made the bike feel better. From there, we got to work with just getting the compliance right, setting the sag. Sag was off. You want 108 on this thing is what Honda's recommending. We had the guys from Factory Connection here today working with us on another project, and so they were kind of helping me sort through this. Obviously, those guys are very comfortable working with Hondas. They work with all the bikes at the Amateur Nationals and stuff like that, but with the Honda, they said 108's kind of the spot to be on this bike. So we set that sag, I checked my clickers again, and went out. We made a couple of changes. I'll get you with what I did. One other thing on the fork. Always check the pressure. I know this is old school. This is like a really basic thing, but some people don't do it. When you get to a track, while your bike is on the stand, before you ride it, so that it needs to be cold and it needs to be completely unweighted. You can't be sitting on your bike and then let the pressure out, because you'll actually have a negative. You'll create a vacuum. Same thing if it's hot. If you ride it a little bit, then you let the pressure out and it bleeds air, then it cools down, you create a vacuum. So before you ride it, while it's cool, while it's on the stand, unscrew both of those top little screws, not your clicker adjuster, it's the other one. Let the air out. That'll make a big difference in the way the fork works. It's very basic, it's old school, but it's still certainly practical. So forks, I went 8 out on the clicks. It started at 12, and I ended up just wanting to get a little bit firmer feeling. I was down the big hills here today, getting a little bit of a dive in the front. And so, you know, I always talk about balance in your setup. And for me, I needed to bring that front end up just a touch. Even dropping the forks down, I still needed more. So I went from 12 to 8, and it still worked great on the little bumps, little chop and chatter, but it held up on those bigger hills. Now, if I got to a flatter track that was maybe dry slick, I might want it a little softer, so I could open it up to 10 clicks. And after a while, you'll start to get comfortable with what setting works best, depending on what track you're riding, right? So here today, I know I like 8 clicks out. If I go to another track that's flat and slick, no hills, maybe I go to 10 or 12 out, and it's softer, so it'll bite a little bit better in the turns, and I don't have to worry about the front end diving on the big hills. So a lot of it comes down to getting to know your bike, getting to know what you like. But for me, 8 out today was a good starting point. Again, 172, 173 is what I weigh. So that's going to change a little bit if you weigh a lot more than that or less than that. But still, it's a good ballpark for you. The shock. So I went 3 3/4 turnout on the high speed. So I actually continued to open it up a little bit from what standard is. I think 2.5 is standard. So I opened up quite a bit the high speed. And what that does, you know, low speed turns into high speed, so they're kind of connected. But what the high speed adjuster does is kind of lets the bike sag down a little bit more. So it's like adding sag without adding more sag. And it gives it a little bit more soft feel on little chop, little bumps, stuff like that, coming out of turns, acceleration chop, which is really important to me. So I tend to open up my high speed more than the average guy would. So you can play with that, but just know that I went out quite a ways, 3 3/4 turnout. And then I'm 10 out on my low speed, so I'm actually a little firmer from stock there. And so to me, that was sort of a balance. That high speed comes out more, gives me that maybe a little bit more squat in the turns, a little bit softer on my acceleration chop, a little bit more supple there. But then the low speed on bigger landings and stuff like that, I get a little bit more, by going in a little bit, it holds up a little bit better on those big landings. So that's where I ended up, 108 on my sag. Gearing is perfect on this thing. I wouldn't mess with gearing. The handlebars are a great bend. I don't think you need to change anything there. I get rid of these stock grips. You know, for shorter guys, I recommend if you've never tried cutting your bars, cut them. Just even if it's a 1/4 inch off either side, you'll notice that if you're somebody that's got a shorter wingspan like myself, it just gives you a lot more control. You get a little bit less nervous feeling because the wider you are, you have more leverage, so it's easier to move back and forth, and you'll tend to get a little bit more head shake at times. So something to think about. Something with bars, if you don't know this, they're typically all cut from the same length of aluminum. They'll take one straight piece of tube of aluminum, chop it into the same length, and then they're all bent into different heights and different sweeps. So the less sweep and the less height that you have, the longer the bar is going to be, right? So think about that. Wow, this is a pretty low bar, and it's pretty straight, which I like. It just makes it a little bit wide for me, and that's also really common on the KTM and Huskies. You'll see those bars are really low and really straight, which makes them very, very wide. So just something to think about there. What else? Make sure this bike was great. You can tell that it's not too loose on the headset. If you let go of your bars here and they just bounce to the side and then go tut, 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 that's too loose. Tighten that up a little bit. Just putting a little bit of tension on that will help you with high-speed stability, get rid of head shake, let you relax your hands and arms a little bit more. It's a small change, but Bones from Pro Circuit, he used to just drill that into my head for years and years, and I finally have admitted that he's right. So thanks a lot, Bones. But it is a big trick. Other than that, man, I love this bike. There's not much else in terms of comfort or performance in the stock trim that you need to do. Get those suspension settings, kind of start there. That'll give you a good place to go. And again, if you are way up there on the weight scale or way down there, you're probably going to need to respring. I would say from 165 to 185, 190, this is probably pretty good. And I think that fits a lot of guys, but bigger guys might find this a little soft if you're 200 plus. So anyway, that's just the way that goes. Great motorcycle. Thanks to Honda for coming out and letting us use this. Thank you to Factory Connection for their help today. They were a big help when just kind of giving us some feedback and advice on this. And we love our Honda. We're going to have some fun on it this year. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one.